episode because I don't trust the live stream to get saved on Rumble. I've had some issues there before. So maybe I'll actually record a local copy. And let's go ahead and hit start streaming. And it worked. Okay, excellent. So we are officially live on both platforms. Let me do a refresh over here on my Rumble browser so I can keep an eye on chat. Oh boy, oh boy. What a 24 hours. Let's hit play. This thing says I'm live, but I look at my Rumble browser and it's still playing the pre-show loop. Come on, catch up. Hopefully you guys have a beverage. I have my morning Rockstar. I know, shouldn't be drinking the Rockstars, owned by Jews. It's got artificial sweeteners and all artificial this and that. But listen, I have a crippling addiction. They have us all addicted to various things. What is going on, Rumble? Come on. There we go. Okay, we're live. Finally. Okay, so wow. I got stuff all over my desk. I got books all over my desk. I got 1984 over here, which is going to be part of our conversation because I was majorly black-pilled last week after I read that. And I did a stream about it and I talked about how the book goes into the concepts of the tiered society that we live in that is not just true of modern times, but is true of all human civilizations. The inner party, the outer party, and the proletariat. That general structure exists across all civilizations, across all times. And that structure matters, like you actually understanding how it works, and that is an intentional structure, and that there are people who want to keep it that way. Understanding that is important. Obviously, the other parts of 1984, where it talks about censorship and thought police, doublethink, wrongthink, totalitarian governments, propaganda, that's all kind of bread and butter stuff that you, as a conservative who's trying to understand what the truth actually is in this world, even though it's a book of fiction, it's not fiction. It really isn't. It really is a accurate capturing of how evil occupies itself in the institutions of men, particularly governments, and uses them as an instrument to bring about Satan's rule on earth. That's what the book is about. Now, the book doesn't approach it from a spiritual lens, but the protagonist actually is a confessed agnostic or atheist when he's questioned towards the end of the book when he's being tortured if he believes in God or not. One of the big epiphanies for you reading that book as a Christian should be this man eventually breaks. He eventually breaks, turns on the people that he loves, turns on the human race, and starts confessing to crimes he did not commit, starts turning in other people. Uh, and part of that is because he doesn't believe in a universal truth that is decreed by God. We as Christians obviously do. We do believe that there are eternal truths in this world, and those are defined by God. They're not defined by college professors, and they're not defined by your parents. They're not defined by the news, and they're not defined by the government. The eternal truths are defined in this text right here by the man who died on this right here. So 1984, I read that last week, and 300 pages in one day, cover to cover. And I was really despondent afterwards because when it talks about war and it talks about how the perpetual ongoing wars are, they're not about trying to go and install democracy in what other country. They're not even necessarily about annexing new territories, trying to expand your empire, that kind of stuff. It's much more about the people who have power wanting to stay in power and trying to keep the proletariat, the worker bee class, continually at the teat of the elites, asking for permission if they can live, asking for permission if they can eat and buy a home and reproduce and get married and have jobs. That's the general nature of war and the general nature of the ruling party. So I don't know how much I want to go into that because I already recapped it last week, but summarized the war part is regards to we live in an age where mechanization, mechanical goods, the industrial revolution, especially that then took off into the digital revolution and the internet age, and now ushering in artificial intelligence, we've come to a point, and we actually got there a long time ago with the industrial age, that the general population are now producing the goods we need to survive, the food, the shelter, the water, the healthcare, all that. There is a surplus of that. There's no shortage of food. There's no shortage of ability to create homes for people, to have heat and cooling in those homes. There's no shortage of medical care for people. And in fact, it's not just that there's not a shortage, like we're at equilibrium. If things were left to their natural pace, we, the general people, not the super uber elite, but we, the general people, would actually start to accrue resources to the extent that we begin to have a surplus. The general population would start to accumulate savings in their bank accounts to the tune of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of dollars. And within your home, you would start to accumulate a surplus of food, and you would start to have the ability to start trading with your community, the excess things that you have but don't need, to accumulate the things you do and upgrade your living conditions and upgrade your living space. You could have a farm, you could have animals, you could become fully self-sufficient. Imagine if you live in a neighborhood of 100 people and suddenly every single one of you got $50,000. And this wasn't like because the government taxed everybody and redistributed the income. It's more like the opposite. Imagine that none of you had to pay the taxes you're currently paying. In my case, 40% of my income. Suddenly, I'm sitting around having tens of thousands of extra dollars every single year. And so imagine if that's happening in your neighborhood across 100 homes. Well, suddenly just your one little neighborhood has millions of dollars of wealth in a very quick period of time. If your neighborhood starts accumulating millions of dollars of wealth, think a little bit larger than that and think out into maybe your county or your city, your community. What happens is your local communities actually start to get very, very wealthy and they can really sustain themselves. They don't need the state government. They don't need the federal government to come in and pave roads for them. They don't need them to come in and build the schools and decide the curriculum of the schools. They don't need the government to be in their lives every single day, 24 hours a day, if we actually had the resources to take care of ourselves locally. This is a substantial problem because if the government can't be in our lives and they don't get to tell us how to live and what to believe and how to prioritize our time, and if they want the resources to go do things they want, such as go to war to fight whatever other superpower or extract the resources from some other part of the world, then they need the resources we're accumulating at record speed. They need to take those from us. And for two purposes. One, to go and achieve their objectives, but more importantly, two, to not allow us to accumulate the resources to the point where we no longer need them. And this is why you see very high taxation and ongoing, perpetual, never-ending war. Because war is literally taking resources, you take them from the people, and you burn them up. You literally just burn them up. You blow up bombs, you test a bunch of bombs before you go drop them on other people. All of the military go out and they shoot their guns and they practice and they burn through tons of ammo. We create a bunch of weapons that we then sell to other nations so that they can do the same thing. The war engine, the military industrial complex, it is in place to make sure that the American people never actually accumulate the resources they need to no longer need the government. That's what the military industrial complex serves to accomplish. So when you realize that these wars are intentional and that they're not ever going to end because they're actually a tool of the people in charge, it gets a little discouraging because at every era of American history, not every, but like for the last, I don't know, 150 years or something, long past any of us being alive, long past our parents and grandparents being alive, we have been told that we have to come together to fight this war for the nation. World War One, World War Two, Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, help out Israel with all of their wars. And we're told that we have to do this or else something bad is going to happen to our nation. We are living in a perpetual state of fear that says, if you guys aren't willing to give us 40% of your money and possibly sacrifice your children for this cause, then hey, America might just go under. Remember Pearl Harbor happened? The Japanese are going to come and occupy our land or something like that. I think right now they're trying to tell us that if we don't spend $250 billion in Ukraine, then Putin is going to go on a global rampage and take over the world. We were told in World War II, if we don't get involved, then Hitler is going to go on a global rampage and take over the world. Okay, so this is the tactic that they have used. They're going to keep using. It's not going to change. These wars are going to continue to happen. They're all going to be engineered, intentional, allowed to happen, orchestrated, however you want to put it. And the taxation to pay for them is never going to stop. And so that prohibits us from ever accumulating the necessary resources to do anything about it. And so as I realized that from reading 1984, that was pretty discouraging because it's like it doesn't matter what president you put into the Oval Office. It doesn't matter what Congress members are sitting there in the Senate, in the House. It doesn't matter what governors are running the states. This is going to be the status quo of the United States for as long as we have a elite. And the elite have been there for hundreds of years in America. They've been there for thousands of years in human history. The people, I mean, you just look at the Roman Empire. Do you think the Roman Empire was different? Do you think that there weren't the top 0.01% of people deciding, okay, here's the military campaign. We need resources to do that. Go and get soldiers, go and get spears, go and get food to pay for this war. Why do we have to go to war? Well, if we don't go to war, the people are going to accumulate their own resources and they're going to overthrow us. So this is, I mean, this is the story of every single empire. So there's not a lot we can do about the fact that war is an ongoing thing in humanity. What is it Jesus says? He says there will always be wars and rumors of wars. Let's pull up the exact quote because I know it's a good one. Wars and rumors of wars. Matthew 24, 6-13. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nations and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginning of birth pains. Hey, it doesn't get better after that, by the way. Do you want me to keep reading? I'll keep reading because you need to know that that's just the birth pains. Okay, the birth pains come before the labor, which is the ultimate pain, which is the end times. Verse 9, then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase in wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Is that not just absolutely beautiful? Like, this is why you have to read the Bible, guys. Like, it just kills me that people will do everything other than read the Bible to try to understand how the world works. They'll go and spend 8 years getting an advanced degree in whatever form of science idolatry is popular right now, pharmakia, Kabbalistic mysticism. They don't know that's what it is, but that's what it is. Psychology, psychiatry, sociology. Do you not understand that these things are already here? They're already in the book that was written, the collection of books that were written thousands of years ago? That there will always be wars and rumors of wars, and that anybody who speaks out against this and accurately diagnoses what's going on, like, hold on, wait a minute. I know why you guys are doing these wars. It's not to keep us safe. It's so that you can stay in power, so that you can fulfill your sinful addiction to pride. That's all it is. Power, the lust for power. I promise you, these people with these agendas running these multi-decade long wars, they are not godly people. They're not sitting around trying to think about how to install God's kingdom here on earth. They're sitting around thinking about, how do I stay in power for as long as possible? How can I go down in the history books as the greatest conqueror of the 21st century? That's what they're trying to accomplish. Look at somebody like George Soros, somebody like Larry Fink, somebody like Bill Gates, all of the United States presidents. These people have no desire whatsoever to make sure that Christianity is the single most important priority of our country. That should be obvious to all of us. When you talk about Bill Gates trying to depopulate the earth, George Soros saying that no nation should exist, there should be no borders anywhere, Larry Fink saying he has a responsibility as a $1 trillion asset manager to force homosexuality and multiculturalism on the nations that don't want it. When you have United States presidents being okay with statues of Satan being erected in government buildings, okay with our public education system teaching children that men and women are interchangeable and that one can become the other, and that if you cut your genitals off, somehow that's going to make your life better. So Matthew 24:6, that's where we're at. We're at the stage of there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. You need to accept this. It's not going to change. It never has changed. And move on to the next stage of, okay, well, what comes after that? Once we acknowledge the fact that these wars are always going to exist and now we understand why they have to exist, what is my role now? Like, what am I supposed to do with this information? Pretty tough, because I titled this stream today, Thomas Massie's wife suddenly dies. We don't know if it's murder. We don't know if it's natural causes. But what we do know is 2 weeks ago, Thomas Massie went on the Tucker Carlson podcast and talked at great length about AIPAC, the America and Israel Political Action Committee, and how they have handlers or agents or whatever you want to call them embedded with every single one of our Republican Congress members, whose full-time job it is to influence and perhaps even blackmail all of our government officials into supporting Israel's interests above America's interests. And I would go further than saying Israel's interest. I would also say Jewish interests, the Jewish people, the Jewish religion, and then obviously Israel, the Jewish nation. Now, why do I say that? AIPAC, within the name, says Israel. It's not the AJPAC, the American and Jewish Political Action Committee. It is the American Israel Political Action Committee. First and foremost, you have to understand that Judaism is an ethno-religion. The Ethnic cultural practices of Jewish people are tied to their religion and vice versa. Their religion is tied to their ethnicity. The end game of the Jewish religion revolves around their own race. So they're inextricable, for one. But for two, all of these people who are embedded double agents of the nation of Israel representing the Jewish people, they don't just stop at advocating for foreign policy and domestic policy that helps the foreign nation of Israel. They go further and they say things like criticizing Jewish people or the Jewish religion. So these are not the foreign nation of Israel. These are the Jews throughout the entire world, especially living here in America. If you criticize the Jewish people or their religion, then that's anti-Semitism. That's the oldest form of hatred, according to them. And they believe that that should be criminalized. It should be a criminal offense for you to have criticism of Jewish people. This is what those people who are sitting in the same offices of our Congress members are paid to do. They're paid to whisper in the ear of our elected officials, hey, I need you because I gave you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to get elected. I need you when this next bill comes up that says, should anti-Semitism hate speech laws be passed in XYZ state, such as Texas, such as Florida, such as the 35 or 37 states who have made it illegal to boycott the nation of Israel. I think it's roughly the same number of states are looking at making anti-Semitism on college campuses illegal, which is just a complete violation of the First Amendment, obviously. But this is the point that I'm making, is that it's not just that they are advocating for the foreign nation of Israel, which is already completely corrupt. We would not tolerate this if it were embedded agents of China whispering in the ear of all of our elected representatives to make sure they vote for pro-Chinese policies because they got money from China to get elected. Nobody would tolerate that, right? It's not that complicated. But because it's Israel, it's totally fine. No big deal. But as I said, the problem doesn't just stop at, hey, make sure Israel gets all the bombs they need. Make sure diplomatically on the world stage, America says that they're Israel's ally and that they support what they're doing. That's diplomatic support, military support, financial support. Don't stop there. Go and change the laws in your own country and make talking about the Holocaust illegal. Criticizing the details or scrutinizing the details of the Holocaust. Talking about the details of the Jewish religion. Talking about the details of Jewish group behavior over the millennia. Make all of that illegal. Benjamin Farming says it's criminalized in my country. I don't know where you live, but that's absolutely true. I can't remember how many European nations it is. Germany, for example, is probably the most egregious example, where they just sent this poor 95-year-old woman to jail. She's like in a wheelchair on the verge of death, and they send her to jail because she criticized some of the details about the Holocaust. Holocaust denial is what they call it. Okay, so we have Thomas Massie, who is a beloved House of Representatives member from the state of Kentucky, who just recently won his reelection campaign. He was doing great. Everybody loves him. He goes up for reelection, and guess who? AIPAC comes along, and they throw some money at the candidate who's running against him, but it's not enough. They can't do a significant enough job to damage his reputation. Because the public actually love him. Like they live with him. They've seen him doing hard work throughout his career. They see that he's an honorable man, loves his wife, loves his children, lives off the grid, works with his hands. He's a genius. He graduated from MIT. Like the guy is brilliant. If you watched his 2-hour interview with Tucker Carlson, you would see this, and there is no disputing it. Like the guy knows everything about electricity, plumbing, how to build a house from scratch. Oh, how the entire government works. Oh, also how the entire government is corrupt. Like the guy is just extremely knowledgeable and also extremely likable, very affable, down to earth, humble. So he goes on Tucker Carlson 2 weeks ago, and they're just kind of casually having a conversation about how you got into working in politics and whatnot. Like he was an entrepreneur. He invented some kind of tech company and got rich off of that. And eventually he got into politics. And so he talked about his path to that. And then Tucker was asking about, some of the problems that he runs into working in Congress. And he just kind of spills the beans all of a sudden. It didn't seem like it was a planned agenda topic or anything like that. He just starts going into why it is that he's unpopular. And the reason he is unpopular in Congress is because every one of these Israel aid bills, he has voted against. Like his track record has a 100% track record of saying, no, we don't need to give foreign aid to Israel, which if you didn't know, we give them like $4.5 billion per year. And over the course of the last 80 years, we've given them close to $250 billion. And so he's just a guy that says, listen, our country needs all of our own resources right now. We are not in a position, we have record high inflation. Nobody alive currently has seen inflation this high. We have so many crises ongoing at the same time in our nation that we just can't be focused on handing out hundreds of billions of dollars to multiple nations at the same time. I mentioned before the 250 billion that have gone to Ukraine. We can't be setting up 3 different fronts of war in every corner of the globe when our own population on our domestic soil is being overrun by foreigners. We have I don't even know what the deficit is at this point. It's like how many trillions of dollars? We have a negative population growth. We have more people committing suicide than ever in recorded history. People aren't having babies. People aren't staying married. Like there's so many problems in America that must be fixed. We don't have the capacity to try to fix other nations' problems right now. We cannot chew gum and walk at the same time. That's what the Democrats always tell you. It's not just the Democrats. The Republicans say this too because they're all bought out by AIPAC. They say, well, we can support Israel and have our priorities here at home addressed too. Clearly not. The demographic has only gotten worse every year. The debt's only gotten worse every year. We've only gotten entangled in more wars every year. The inflation's only gotten higher. The cost of living has only gotten worse. The ability to buy a home is practically impossible for anybody. We cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. Like we have proven that that is not true. But the checkbook is still open. We're still just handing out money like we don't even want it. None of us want to save money for our own families. Who cares about that? None of us want to have a nest egg so that we can eventually not have to work ourselves to death until we're 90 years old. No, we need to support Ukraine in this fake war with Russia. And we need to support Israel and their antagonistic, imperialistic endeavors of trying to create their greater Israel agenda, where they're going to try to take all of Jordan and parts of Egypt and parts of several other nations to expand their Jewish nation. Like none of these other nations are our nation. We are America. These are American dollars created by American people. American people worked to create this wealth. It should be reinvested in America. It would be one thing if we were living in the most prosperous age in American history and everybody was just like, man, I got so much money, I don't know what to do with it. Man, I got 5 kids over here and I still can't spend my money fast enough. That would be one thing. But that's the opposite of what's happening. Everybody is chronically unhealthy, unhappy, unmarried, not having kids. Nobody trusts the government. We can't even get people to fight in our military because nobody trusts the military. Nobody sees the country worth dying for. And fairly so. I wouldn't die for this country. I would die for Jesus Christ, but I would not die for this country, especially not the people who run it. So existential problems are mounting here in America. And so Thomas Massie goes on the Tucker Carlson interview and says, listen, a lot of these problems come from conflicts of interest from lobbyist groups who have bought and paid for basically the entire government. And the largest culprit of that is the foreign nation of Israel. such to the extent that they have hired full-time employees who literally babysit our Congress members to make sure that they are staying within the lines of obeying their Israel first agenda. Very bold interview. I was shocked. I mean, this was by far the most important shred of journalism that has surfaced. You could say maybe what Candace Owens has been doing ever since being fired from Daily Wire, but it's the same thing. What is she talking about? She's talking about Israel and the Jews. So this disclosure on Israel that has been slowly accumulating over the last 18 months, really ever since Kanye came in with the battering ram and went DEFCON 5, we got to thank him. He was a large part of shifting the Overton window, and we got to thank Nick Fuentes. The guy's been putting in 7 years of work with no thanks whatsoever from our actual political institutions, the people who are supposed to be standing up for America's interests. They've done the opposite. They exiled him. Turning Point USA, Daily Wire, they have all not just exiled him, they have slandered him, ruined his reputation, and cast him to the outskirts of the internet where he can't even stream live without having to build his own website. Nobody would host his show. So the progress we have made has been very encouraging. Thomas Massie goes and drops these bombshells on Tucker Carlson's interview, 2 hours long. And I was like, wow, that was pretty bold. And his wife is there with him at the interview. They talk to her. She's off camera, but they wave and they talk and that kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, pretty impressive. I guess we all got to get behind this Thomas Massie guy. He's got a great track record of being against Israel. Now he's bold enough to go on the largest conservative podcast that exists and name not the Jews, but at least name Israel. And then yesterday happens. Let's take a sip of our beverages before we get into yesterday, because this is really the headline story. And I'm going to pull up a couple of things to read and talk about what comes next here. I don't agree with many of your views, but you're jacked as fuck, so you have my universal respect by default. Thanks. Thanks, Funky Mint, bro. I appreciate that, man. It is true that once you become physically commanding and you pretty much optimize, like you maximize your potential physically, it garners respect from people, especially smart people. Smart people understand that it's not about how much weight you can lift and it's not about how you look. Smart people realize that the only way to achieve lifting lots of weights or looking that way comes from a ridiculous amount of self-denial and discipline, a work ethic that frankly 99% of the population don't have, the ability to delay instant gratification for long-term benefits. Those are behaviors, and it's frankly a lifestyle. It's an ongoing choice that you say, my entire life is going to be structured around discipline. My entire life is going to be structured around a very narrow path that the overwhelming population do not take because they don't have the discipline to do it. And so that commands respect. That's what people stop and say, hey, man, that's actually pretty impressive. It's not about the way you look, and it's not about, oh my gosh, you can bench or squat this much weight. It's about knowing this guy makes the difficult decisions every day. When he's feeling tired after he just worked an 8-hour day, when you're lonely, you got broken up with, your family is fighting, you're physically sick, you still go and you do the work that you know must be done in order to sustain that physicality. And I mean, there's obvious importances to having that physicality as well. If shit hits the fan and we're all having to fend for ourselves, trust me, you're probably going to want more muscle than less muscle. You want to be capable of defending yourself, defending your home, and defending your family and loved ones. And you're not going to be that if you're 125 pounds soaking wet. Sorry. You need to be able to lift objects and hold objects, keep doors closed, carry people, and so on. So go get jacked yourself. That's all I'm saying. I won't talk that much more about that. But everybody does need to take care of their bodies because it's important. Not to mention, it's the physical temple that houses the Holy Spirit. When the body dies, the soul exits it, and hopefully, so long as you're a believer, you're going to join God in eternity in heaven. But for the time being, in order to protect the Holy Spirit and its positive influence here on earth, you need to have a healthy body. So let's look at the Thomas Massie situation and his wife and the news about his wife yesterday that came out. So I'm going to jump over to Twitter over here on my Megatron. This was something that I had forgotten. There was something that happened a month ago on May 16th. I just mentioned 2 weeks ago, Tucker was on the show, the podcast with Massie, and they talked all about AIPAC, right? That was a big deal. I had forgotten that on May 16th, you can go look at Thomas Massie's Twitter. I'll read it straight to you. I just introduced End the Fed. Title, Federal Reserve Board Abolition Act, H.R. 8421. Americans would be better off if the Federal Reserve did not exist. The Fed devalues our currency by monetizing the debt and causing inflation. And then he posts pictures of the documents that he submitted, H.R. 8421, that go over why we need to end the Federal Reserve. Created in 1913, it basically handed over the power of, or the control of our United States currency to international bankers, aka Jews, the Rothschilds, and so on. I had honestly forgotten this even happened, which just goes to show the problem with the 24-hour news cycle, that something as substantial as a sitting congressman can do something as bold as telling the federal government, we need to end the Fed. That's not something that happens every day. The last time that happened, who was it? JFK. One of the reasons he died for like three reasons. One, he understood the Fed and that it had to go. Two, he understood that AIPAC, previously called like the Zionist Organization of America or whatever it was back then, was nothing more than foreign bribery of U.S. officials. Three, he understood that Israel's nuclear program was an existential threat for the world. He understood that if Israel actually obtained nuclear weapons, these people do not operate with a Christian morality. And sure enough, they go and concoct the Samson option, which says if Israel is ever under existential threat, they'll just unleash their nuclear arsenal all across the world indiscriminately, killing millions of innocent people. And so JFK addressed all of this, and we know what happened to him, and we know what happened to his brother. Ted Pike in 1987 went and created a documentary called The Other Israel. You guys can go and find it on BitChute. It's a great compilation of talking about this problem, AIPAC's influence of our governmental representatives. And it also shares a lot of details about the Jewish religion that Christians in America are completely clueless of. It talks about the contents of the Babylonian Talmud and that it completely changes the entire perspective of who Jews are, religious Jews especially, if you're even aware of what that context says, what that text says. Most people in America, especially Christians, think that the Jews are a religious group that cling to the Old Testament, whereas Christians cling to the New Testament, and that's the difference between us. No, that's not true. That's not true whatsoever. I don't know if I really want to go into the entire details of modern day Judaism, the differences between temple Judaism, which is the ancient Israelites religion in the Old Testament, where their relationship with God revolved around attending a physical temple in bringing animals and spices and harvest and all that kind of stuff, burnt offerings that they offer to God to absolve their sins. That's the ancient Israelite religion, and that is called Temple Judaism. The religion revolved around the physical temple. With the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, the Jews had to figure out what that meant for their religion. Now, keep in mind, this is shortly after the life of Jesus Christ, who came and rebuked them and said that all of your teachings of the rabbis are idolatrous. They are self-worshiping. They are worshiping yourselves as a group of people distinct, apart from the rest of the world, believing that you have a relationship with God that is exclusive forever. That's not true. I am God. Jesus is speaking as himself, and he says, I am God. I am here now to fulfill the prophecies of the Messiah of your religion. Read the Old Testament, all of the prophets, Elijah, and so on. They told you that I was coming, and they told you that I was going to liberate the world, not just you guys, from tyranny and slavery. They interpreted that, they being the Jews, interpreted that as meaning this Messiah character was going to come and annihilate the Roman government and free the Jewish people. That's who they were expecting the Messiah to be. They thought he was going to be a warlord who shows up on a horse with a sword in each hand and chops people's heads off and leads them all into some other kind of military victory. Well, Jesus comes and says, I am indeed that Messiah, but that is not the fulfillment of what needs to be done. The fulfillment of what needs to be done is to extend the relationship with God to all people of the earth, to where it is no longer exclusive to just the Abrahamic line, and explain to them all how they can save themselves, which is obviously the passion story, Jesus dying on the cross for our sins, and the opportunity for all of us through learning this story is the purpose of his death. The purpose of his death being the new burnt offering. We are no longer needed to sacrifice animals and spices and do ceremonies and rituals and chants and incantations and all this other stuff, dances or anything like that. The way that we have a relationship with God is through knowing Jesus Christ. This is John 14:6. Jesus himself says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. And so knowing and having a personal relationship with Jesus is the new covenant that God came to establish, not just for the Jews, but for all people. We obviously know the rest of the story. The Jews said, no, we disagree. And we don't just disagree. We think that you saying these words is a violent risk to us and our practices. And so we have to have you not silenced, but killed. And they do. They work with the local Pharisees, the Sadducees, the leaders of the Jewish religion at that time, and they conspire with the Roman government to have him arrested, tortured, publicly mocked and ridiculed, nailed to a cross, executed. Now, much to their chagrin, Jesus' message does not end there because Jesus does not die. Well, he dies for a couple of days, and then he comes back on the third day, and he illustrates that everything he said about being God and having the supreme authority and capabilities of God, being God, this is the manifestation of that. Self-resurrection. No other human has done that. Jesus brought back Lazarus, sure, but no other human has self-resurrected. And then obviously all the miracles Jesus performed throughout his life and the entire gospel stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, you read those and all the other evidence that exists to illustrate that God is Jesus. Jesus is God. And so the Jews are very upset at this because they tried to kill him and were willing to go, they successfully killed him, and it illuminated just how far they are willing to go to kill people who criticize them. And this is like the key takeaway of the whole New Testament. This 2,000-year and ongoing conflict between the Jews and Christians has been repeating ever since. Every time somebody accurately diagnoses the Jewish people, what they believe about the future and what they believe is necessary to protect that future, subtext means kill anybody who objects to it. The future being, by the way, after we kill everybody who objects to it and we safely get to bringing about our Messiah, who is not Jesus Christ, they believe that the end game of their religion is going to be a society where they are the top 0.01% of the population and they employ a slave class of human beings called Goyim. All non-Jews fall into this category. Every race, every nation, every other religion, doesn't matter. We're all going to be their slave class, not deprived or not bestowed human rights. We don't have the right to own property. We don't have the right to get married, reproduce, practice whatever religion we want. Does that sound a lot like communism? Do you think maybe it's a coincidence that communism was invented by Jewish people? No, it's not a coincidence. It's their structured religion. It's their desired outcome. It's their desired structure of the world. And so this conflict that's been ongoing for the last 2,000 years has been Jewish people trying to bring about their Messiah, Christians fighting back, the Jews killing the people who fight back, all of the prophets, all of the martyrs, Jesus himself, people like JFK, people like Ted Pike's wife. And if they don't literally kill them, they just go after everything that they have in a worldly perspective, their reputation, their wealth, their status, and so on. So I had forgotten that Thomas Massie, just a month before going on the record and talking about this whole AIPAC influence in Congress, only a month before that, he was saying we have to end the Federal Reserve, which, as we know, that is the head of the snake. If you've watched Europa: The Last Battle, the 12-hour-long documentary series, it starts off with, the very first minute of the documentary series starts off with, if we ever want to fix this situation, the head of the snake is the money. Nathan Rothschild said it himself. I don't care who runs whatever nation. You can elect a Democrat, a liberal, a progressive, a conservative, a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu. I don't really care who runs a nation formally. Give me control over that nation's money supply, and I will control that nation. The Jews figured this out thousands of years ago. Why is this, by the way? Why is it if you just capture the money, then you get everything else? It's actually pretty simple, and I'll walk you through it quickly. Once you get control of the money, you can do exactly what AIPAC has done, where they just flat out bribe and buy influence. They do this in the government. They say, hey, if you want to run a presidential campaign, you know that costs like hundreds of millions of dollars? Do you know how much TV time you have to pay for to get in front of enough millions of eyeballs to win the Democratic vote? The same is true at the state level as well. You want to be a governor like Ron DeSantis? Well, maybe it's in your best interest to come to Israel, put on a yarmulke and kiss the wall and go tour the Holocaust Museum. And while you're here, sign a bill that makes anti-Semitism illegal in Florida. They use the money that they accumulate through the usurious tactics of the central reserve banking systems installed all throughout the world to capture the nation's money supply. Once they've captured the money, they buy the politicians. The politicians are the people who write the laws. So they create the guardrails for society, what's legal and what's not. Furthermore, once you capture the money supply, you can then capture the lines of communication with the proletariat. How do people even form their worldview, by the way? All of us little worker bees, how do we come to understand the world, current events, things happening around us? We live in a tiny little city. No matter how much traveling you do, you're not going to be aware of what's really going on in the whole state that you live in the whole nation that you live in, especially not the whole world. And so, what do you do to try to gain an understanding of how everything else is functioning larger than the little neighborhood and city that you live in? You entrust the education system to educate you, and you entrust the media to inform you. You turn on the news to figure out what the news is, and you go to school to get an education on how the world works and how history has played out. Well, what the Jews figured out, this is all documented, by the way, in the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, is that once again, once you control the money, you can go and donate to places like Harvard. You can give them $50 million to make sure that when they teach the world history of the wars in the last 100 years, World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, the creation of Israel, you get to say, hey, I gave your college $50 million. And so when you teach these subjects, you need to make sure they are taught from a perspective that makes Israel and Jews look good. That simple. They get to actually decide the education curriculum from kindergarten all the way through higher education using their financial influence. And the same is true with the media. When you look at who runs the media, Bob Iger, who owns Disney, which also owns CNN and ESPN and ABC, and you look at Brian Roberts, who owns Comcast, who owns Paramount, who owns NBC, who owns 50 other major media corporations. You look at Jeff Bezos, who runs the largest retailer in the world, Amazon, who also happens to own the Washington Post. You look at the Fox dynasty, the Murdoch dynasty, who owns Fox, who also happens to own the New York Post. In that text I mentioned before, the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, it talks about back then, before the internet existed, how if you capture the publishing houses, the people who print books, the people who print newspapers, journals, the media institutions, the radios, the television networks, the film studios, the recording studios. If you capture all of those, then you capture the brain of society. And so this is why the head of the snake has been diagnosed to be the money, because once you have the money, you can just flat out buy everything else. And so without addressing the money situation, who controls the money in our nation, we're never going to get out of this. And so when somebody does something as bold as saying, maybe we shouldn't have international Jews control the United States dollar. That's what Thomas Massie did on May 16th. It's right here. I'm looking at it. He says, I just introduced in the Federal Reserve Board Abolition Act HR 8421. Americans would be better off if the Federal Reserve did not exist. The Fed devalues our currency by monetizing the debt and causing inflation. So he does this a month ago. He then goes on the largest conservative podcast that exists with the most influential conservative commentator that exists, Tucker Carlson, on the largest tech platform that exists, Twitter, political tech platform. And he spills the beans on AIPAC's influence in Congress. And then 2 weeks later, his wife, who was just hiking up and down mountains a couple days ago, suddenly dies. And they don't tell us why, what the cause of death was, if she was sick, if this was a sudden heart attack, who knows? What I did see was, I believe I could infer from a video that was posted by was it Marjorie Taylor Greene or somebody else of a clip this morning. The United States Congress confirms that Thomas Massie's wife died suddenly. And this is all of the Congress members, including Mike Johnson, standing here looking very solemn, saying that Thomas Massie is now going back to Kentucky to obviously attend to his family. But what that tells you is that Thomas was not present when this happened. His wife died while he was in Washington, D.C. We don't know. We don't have any facts. We don't have an autopsy. Massie himself hasn't said what's happened. All we know is that a month ago, he comes out against the Fed. 2 weeks ago, he comes out against Israel influencing our government. 2 weeks later, his wife is dead. So I want to read something that I wrote on my phone last night. I was actually trying to sleep and I was thinking about all of this and how bad it all is. I was thinking about Ted Pike and his wife mysteriously dying after he came out against AIPAC. Thinking about JFK, who wanted to do the exact same things. Don't let Israel influence our government and don't let Jews own our currency. He ends up dead. They kill his brother to cover that up. And, I like to think of myself as a pretty masculine guy, but I was sitting in prayer last night and I brought myself to tears over these stillborn efforts that we have tried to birth in trying to fix the world that we live in. We have tried to bring these things into being. We have tried to wake the United States people up. That documentary I mentioned by Ted Pike came out 40 years ago. JFK died when? 60, 70 years ago? The mountain of evidence has existed longer than all of us have been alive. And it has not been sufficient to wake the world up and to actually do anything about it. And so I was praying about this last night and I was telling God, or more like asking him, what are we supposed to do? Like, seriously, you finally get one person in Congress out of 500 and something who is willing to stand up to the nation of Israel, a true patriot. And this guy, by the way, he doesn't even align with us politically on a number of topics: abortion, multiculturalism. He's not like our guy in terms of conservatism. He's much more of a libertarian. But before I get into that, Instagram is about to shut me off, by the way. It's giving me a 2-minute warning. So I'm going to kill this stream and restart it. That way it doesn't lose the saved recording. If I actually let it play out the 2 minutes, it won't save this recording. So I'm going to kill this and I'm going to restart the stream. So Instagram, sit tight. Rumble, you guys sit tight. Hold on. We'll end this, call it part one. Actually, I need to call it Thomas Massey's wife dies suddenly. Part one. I can't stand this 1 hour limit on Instagram. It's so frustrating. If you Google how long can you live stream on Instagram, it says like 4 hours. Not for me though. I don't know why. Never has been. It's never let me stream for anything longer than an hour. All right, so it's got to upload that and we'll hit live again, and then we'll get back into my prayer last night. Oh man, bad shape over here. Come on, Instagram, hurry up. Live part two. Done. You want the blur background? Yeah, sure, we'll go with the blur background. Instagram's doing its countdown. 3, 2, 1, and we're live again. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to get back into the live stream who was watching. And I'll pull up these notes that I wrote. I'm sitting in bed. It's like 11 o'clock last night. And this is after I called my friend. You guys may know J Slay USA, Jeremy. I've been on his show 3 times. He's another patriot. He's another guy who's fully red pilled, who's enduring a lot of personal anguish over trying to get this message out. He's suffering like all of us suffer who try to do this work. And we had a pretty deep conversation about, is it even worth it? Is it even worth it? When we quite literally have our family and our elected representatives killed to try to make this happen, and in 100 years, we haven't made no progress. We have gone far backwards. The Jews have more control over our nation than they ever have before, over our media, over our education system, over our economy through finance, and obviously over our government. And so we're sitting there saying, like, at this point, why are we doing this? Like, why are we sacrificing our personal relationships with family, putting ourselves in physical danger, putting our careers at risk, putting our life savings at risk? What is the point of all this? Is it worth it? Because it doesn't seem that even people who are far more talented and influential than us, they get further than us, and then they either just get killed or they disappear or whatever it is, nothing ever happens. And so I'm trying to take these questions to God last night, and he finally responded in the prayer, because I was like, I don't see that any of our work is really helping, God. Everything we try to do to fix this situation, we're only in a worse situation now. They're killing off people's family. Maybe, allegedly. We don't know yet, but it could certainly be interpreted that way. And then my mind gave me the exact response that God would direct us toward. And I'm going to share that with you because this is the message of the day. We can sit here and be brokenhearted about the state of things, about the failure to change these things over decade, over decade, over decade. But this is a very important miss on our part. We have missed something. We have misinterpreted something. We have misinterpreted our purpose. Our purpose is not to fix the world being, your immediate surroundings, the city, county, state, country. We are not put on this earth to fix the fallen nature of the world. In fact, we're told from the get-go that long before we were born, this earth, everybody on it, became desperately, hopelessly, I should say, actually, stricken with sin. The purpose of us being here is to eventually establish a relationship with God and to save ourselves, and as we learn the truth, try to save as many other people. That's why we're here. We are not here to fix the world. And the world is synonymous for your nation and your local, whatever it is. It's desirable to try to improve the circumstances and the scenarios around us. Obviously, I'm not saying stop trying to make things better. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, if you have a broken heart because you have tried to change things for the better and failed, and you have watched other people try to change things for the better and they have failed, that's not demonstrative of those people having wasted their time or that their mission wasn't righteous to try to improve those things. But that shouldn't be your North Star. Your North Star is, as I said, establishing a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, securing your future in heaven through a close relationship with Jesus Christ. And then once your faith is foundational, it's not changing, it's secure, you go out into the Great Commission, into the mission field, and you try to bring as many other people into the fold as you can, knowing that this world is not going to get better. We are not going to fix the world. That's what God told me back in my prayer. That's what he had to remind me, that this heartbreak you're feeling, it's because you're chasing the wrong thing. It's because you are sitting around thinking, if I just work hard enough, and if I just get the evidence to enough people, if I change enough people's minds, then this world will be a better place. It's not going to happen. And I know that comes off very blackpilling, that the world is not going to become a better place. But we have to be realistic about the human condition and the fallen state of the world. These are things that we inherited. We didn't choose this. God tells us that this is the status quo. God tells us even further in John 15:18 that once we recognize the status quo and we feel The imperative reaction after being saved and after learning that, oh man, I can help other people save themselves. The imperative reaction you feel inside to go into your community and evangelize and try to teach people about the gospel, the good news, that should be your focus. The focus should not be trying to fix the government, trying to fix the education system. And this is tough because we don't want a rotten public education system and we don't want a rotten government. When we have those things, they negatively impact our life. I understand this. I'm not a moron. But what I'm saying is the purpose of a Christian life is not centered around man-made institutions. The objective of the Christian life is not to make the best man-made institutions. The purpose of a Christian's life is, as I said, and I'll reiterate it many times, step one, establish a relationship with God, understand the teachings of Jesus Christ as captured in the New Testament, understand the purpose of Jesus' life, God assuming human form in the body of Jesus to talk to us man to man for the first time, to demonstrate how much he loves us by walking the earth in human form and enduring human pain, humiliation, torture, being drugged through the streets, mocked and ridiculed, rejected by the people who claim to love him, by the people who claim to have waited thousands of years for him to come. Those people not just rejected him and called him a liar and accused him of practicing black magic and necromancy, they then killed him. And so in John 15:18, Jesus himself warns us that when you feel that imperative reaction to go and teach the rest of the world about how all of this works and what our actual purpose is for being here, the world is not going to receive that message well. They are going to hate you. Those are the exact words. Let's pull up John 15:18. I can actually probably do this one from memory. Let's see if I can get it. For if the world hates you, know that it hated me first. For if you were of the world would love you as its own. But it is because I chose you out of this world, that is why the world hates you. So when Jesus sends his disciples out 2 by 2 to preach to the nations about the good news that, sure, this world may be fallen, but that doesn't mean you have to live a heartbroken life, a life of slavery and addiction to sin, and then eternal damnation afterward. The good news is that you can actually live a loving life, a joyous, fulfilling life by pursuing God and by bringing other people to God. That's the good news. That you, oh, by the way, also, you get to spend eternity with the creator of the universe afterward. You get to be reunited with all of your family afterward, assuming they're also believers. When you go out and share this good news with the world, you would think that they would be excited and you would think that they would say, wow, I don't have to put all of my faith in this awful, corrupt government who just kills people when they don't like them. Unfortunately, that's not what John 15:18 says. It says that the world is going to hate you when you go out and do this. Why? Not because of something you did wrong, not because you said the wrong things. You can just literally read the text of the Bible. You don't even have to summarize or try to add any kind of like homily context or anything like that. If you just read Bible verses to the general public, they will respond with such vitriol and bitterness that unfortunately we receive that as something we have done wrong. We feel like, what did I do wrong to be hated this way? What did I do wrong to have my family and my career, my very livelihood threatened? You didn't do anything wrong. You're living in a fallen world. And it's admirable that you're trying to go out and fix it. But keep in mind, the objective is not fixing the world. The objective is saving souls. That's our purpose. The Great Commission is not go create a better government. The Great Commission is go and evangelize and get people the good news. That's really the theme of today's show. That's the message that pulled me out of pretty dark black pill yesterday. On the back of 1984 and thinking about these wars are not going to end. These corrupt governments, they're structured this way for a reason, and the people who run them, they're not going to surrender control. The influence, the worldly possessions that they have accrued, the wealth, the influence, the status, the power, the positions they have occupied, make it so that the odds are dramatically against us making any meaningful difference if our objective was to try to go and fix all of those institutions. It's not to say those institutions can't be perhaps recreated in a better image like they originally were. Our original government in America that revolved around Christianity was great. Our original schools in America, even Harvard and Yale, the first two institutions of higher education in America, were originally schools that were created to teach the Bible and to create the next generation of pastors. That's why America succeeded for the first several hundred years, was because we had a devoutly Christian population. It's called divine providence. The story of empires rising and falling throughout human history, it rides a wave of faith. As the nations are rich in faith, they prosper, they grow, and they succeed because God's blessing is upon them. But as those nations apostatize and turn their back on God, God removes his divine hand from their endeavors. And this is exactly what you're witnessing in America. You have 1 million children every year sacrificed to the devil. 1 million. Do you think that America is going to look down on America and say, yeah, that country is clearly doing what I want them to be doing? They are prioritizing the Great Commission. They're prioritizing a relationship with me and helping everybody else who doesn't know me find me. Is that what America is doing? No, it's not. America is legalizing gay marriage, normalizing transgenderism, aborting 1 million babies per year, perverting their patriarchal model that is human life, that God established and defined in inarguable terms, bastardizing marriage, normalizing prostitution, child prostitution. We are the capital of child sex trafficking in the world. And you think God is going to bless us? And so this is what we get. Your nation turns its back on God. The devil comes in, assumes control, and kills anybody who tries to resist. It's really not complicated, guys. It's really not. Do I even have anything else to go over today? I don't think so. So, I mean, here's the thing. It's extremely blackpilling to realize that this is just a state of things. The elections don't matter. We have no control over our government. We have no control over how the public information diet is constructed. The same way the corrupt government promoted the toxic food pyramid that contributed to obesity tripling in 50 years. In one lifetime, obesity tripled in America. How did that happen? Because our federal government went and told all of our public education system that, hey, the right way for a human to just simply live feeding themselves, they told them this. It was clearly wrong. It said to eat like 8 to 12 servings a day of carbohydrates, all this other crap, and to basically avoid eating animal meat and nutrient dense proteins. in the same way that they have intentionally destroyed the physicality of our nation, they have destroyed the information diet. They attacked our actual diet, and then they attacked our information diet, to where everything you understand about the world, because this is what you receive from the education, and it's what you receive from the media, and it's what the government tells you have to believe. It's like being told to go and eat 8 to 12 servings of sugar a day or whatever else. It's like being told that you can be healthy at any weight. This stuff is just flat out lies. It's like being told that America, which was once a devoutly Christian nation founded for Christians by Christians, who only allow Christians to run their government, who taught the Bible in kindergarten and every other grade afterward, it's like going from that to one nation under God, whoever God is, could be whatever God you worship, doesn't really matter. Let's take the Bible out of schools and let's take prayer out of the government, and let's not allow you to talk about your faith when you're in the workplace. Take God out of every part of society, and surely that will have no negative repercussions on the nation. It's a flat out lie. Religions are not interchangeable in the same way that ethnic cultures are not interchangeable, in the same way that the genders are not interchangeable. These are just like universal truths of life. We know that Christianity is the only true religion. We know that man and woman are the only genders. We know that there are different peoples of the world, different people groups, and we know that human behavior has what they call an in-group bias, which means people who look like you, sound like you, share the same history as you, share the same physical space as you form a bond with those people. That doesn't mean you hate all other people, and it doesn't mean you should never expose yourself to other people outside of your group, but it does mean it's natural human behavior to prefer your own culture over others. This is not immorality, and it's not whatever racism is, whatever they think that means. Didn't really touch on white identity today. I don't really need to go down that path today, because this is really just about the fallen world that we live in and what our marching orders are. And so I'll close with this, because I've been reading this book this week, The Principles of War, a handbook on strategic evangelism. I got about 20 pages left. It's a short book. It's like 130 or 140 pages. And if you're familiar with the principles of war, I think it's Sun Tzu originally wrote like the secular principles of war. And it's just human knowledge. Like I said, it's secular knowledge about when you do have to go to war. There's some basic tenets that if you observe these and practice these, those who practice them tend to have more victorious wars than defeats. Well, you can look at those tenets of war from a Christian perspective and try to figure out how the Bible explains to approach each of those tenets of war. So, for example, having a clear objective for your war, number one, the concept of being on the offensive, the concept of concentration, mobility, security, surprise, cooperation, lines of communication, the economy of force, pursuit, and obedience. These are just basic principles of war that many militaries across all people groups of the world, across all eras of human history, have understood. If you become keen on those and how they work and how important they are, then you improve your odds at succeeding in whatever war you're undergoing. Well, this book provides the Christian perspective on how we as Christians, as evangelists, can use those same principles of war to win the spiritual battle that we are in. And so I'm trying to figure out how I want to deliver that content. I could do it in a casual live stream like this where I'm just hanging out talking to you guys. I could do it scripted and recorded and edited all fancy. I'm not sure yet. But I want to get to that pretty soon because it's very, very good content. Let me just share. I'm going to flip to a random one. See, I got all these highlights in the book. Which one would be a good one to go over? And I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I just want to give you a glimpse of what that kind of looks like. So let's take the chapter about security. It says, before we can secure from attacks by an enemy, we must know there is an enemy. Okay, that's like a pretty obvious take, right? But it is something we have to stop and remember. If you're sitting around trying to figure out, why does our government suck? Why does the media suck? Why does the education system suck? Why is our currency crashing through the ground? Why is the cost of living making it so that nobody can own a home until their late 30s? Why are 50% of marriages failing? Why are 50% of 30-year-old women single and childless? Why do we have more people committing suicide in our nation than ever before in recorded history? Why do we have more people dying of drug overdoses than ever in history? If you think that these things are just like organic, undiagnosable problems, then that illustrates that you have not identified the enemy. And so, step one of security, you can't have security until you understand who the enemy is. And in this case, we know who the enemy is. We know who's perverting the education system and the government and the media and using their capture of our economy to do so. Jesus called them the Synagogue of Satan. Jesus called them the children of the devil. Jesus called them a whitewashed tomb. The nation that has an enemy but does not think so is very insecure. Yeah, you could say that. Intelligence of an enemy ensures knowing who he is, what his intentions are, and his methods of operating. Do you guys see how I'm explaining this all as connected now? I went through some of the methods of operating. First, you get the money. You use the money to buy the politicians and pass laws in your favor. You use the money to capture the publishing houses, all of the industries that create the information diet of the people. So it is in spiritual war. Our enemy is Satan. We must know who he is, what he does, his intentions and methods. And I'm skipping over a lot. As you can see, I just read the highlighted portions. It's on the next page here. At present, there seems to be among Christians an inordinate, almost insatiable desire to be informed about the cults, the occult, and New Age movements. Although we are not to be ignorant of Satan or his devices, we are not to fill up our heads and hearts with foul, evil untruths. Here's a quote from Romans 16:9. I would have you wise as to what is good and guileless as to what is evil. Then the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. Okay, so what that's saying, what Paul is saying in his letter to the Romans right there, is he's saying, first and foremost, understand where the source of good comes from. Well, right here. Okay, this is your source of good. This is your source of truth. But likewise, Paul says, understanding the truth is important. You also have to understand where guile comes from. And if you guys don't know what the word guile means, it means nefarious, manipulative, deceitful, dishonest. You have to understand where that's coming from. It's important to understand the truth and the source of good. It's also important to understand the source of evil and manipulation. Our combatants are not flesh and blood, but principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places, and they are masterminded by the devil himself. That's scripture. That's not the author, that's scripture. And so when we see evil and we see corruption in the government, we see the push for transgenderism, and we try to say, that's just the liberals. Oh, those Democrats are at it again. Oh, those are Marxists. Oh, they're pushing communism again. It's Satan and his children. That's where all of these things come from. There is no evil that is not derived from Satan. He is the source of all evil. A wall around a city may be strictly defensive, but armor, by definition, is not. Webster's Collegiate Dictionary says of armor that conceived of as an offensive or defensive weapon, a soldier does not cover himself with armor because he intends to read a good book in front of his fireplace. He is going off to battle. He has every intention of going into harm's way. He is looking for and expecting a fight. This is important. I highlighted this. That's not scripture. That's the author explaining. When we as Christians talk about donning the armor of God, the sword, the helm, the breastplate, all of that stuff, we see that as, okay, I got to get defensive. I got to get prepared so that when they come after me, I don't die. I know how to defend myself and my family. But the fact of the matter is that armor is actually as much offensive as it is defensive. As the author says, you put on your armor when you go into battle. When you're on the offensive and you're trying to go toward the fight to resolve the fight, the armor plays just as much of a relevant role there. So I know Christians like to talk about putting on the armor of God and getting ready for battle, but we have to consider that that's an offensive thing too. Yet, seemingly in the minds of many Christians, a defensive position in the spiritual life is considered a virtue and an offensive position a sin. Josh, I like your stream. I like that you're trying to get the gospel into people's hands, but could you be like a little less confrontational? Could you be a little less aggressive? That's what they think a Christian's supposed to be. They think a Christian is supposed to be timid, passive. Hey, man, let's just avoid the conflict, try to keep the peace. That is not what Jesus taught. Defense is associated with the innocent party, as though we expect only the wicked to take up offense. For this reason, the virtuous pride themselves on being defenders instead of taking up the offense for truth, justice, holiness, and a powerful personal witness. Let us never forget that without an eventual offensive, defense only anticipates ultimate defeat. I like that comment there from Ethan Heritage that says, I want militant Christianity back. That's exactly right. And we actually have to be militant, not proactively violent, but militant, insistent, courageous, devout in our belief that Jesus Christ is who he said he was, and that there is only one morality that is successful for humans to live amongst, within, among each other, and that is the morality prescribed in the New Testament. So this is a great book, and so that's just a small preview of the principles of war, that first one being security, how you have to understand where the enemy is, what his tactics are, who he is. In order to be secure, if you don't even know who your enemy is and how he operates, you're not going to be secure. And so there are 10 other principles of war that we need to look at from a Christian perspective. Can I go into one more? Do you guys want one more today? I'll go into one more because I was talking to my friend Jeremy about this last night. Is it called supply, I believe? Flip to the table of contents here. Lots of trace, security, mobility, surprise, communication. Communication, 99. I'm sorry, page 99, but it's principle number 8. As Christians, we have 2 modes of communication that we must use in war. One is prayer. Prayer is how we take our needs to God. This is how we petition God for capabilities that we don't have. I cannot change the government. I cannot go and reform the entire public education system to get them back on track. I can't go and change the media to stop them from promoting transgenderism and the hedonistic lifestyle. I just don't have the faculties to do that. And there are many, many other things that are so large that we as individuals or even as collectives, we can't practically go out and impact. Certainly not in the short term. And so what we can do, however, is ask the one source of power who can accomplish those things through means that we can't even comprehend because he has an infinite view. He sees all circumstances happening at the same time simultaneously. He sees everybody, what they're doing behind the scenes, behind closed doors, who they're working for. He knows their weaknesses. We don't know their weaknesses. When we go in prayer and ask God for the divine protection and providence for his modern day saints and prophets, soldiers of Christ who are out there doing this work, people like Thomas Massie, people like JFK, people like Ted Pike, people like Nick Fuentes. We can go in prayer to the most powerful being that has ever existed and ever will exist and say that we need your protection. That is one line of communication that we as Christians have that Satanists do not. Secular people do not. They do not have the willpower of God behind them. We do. God blesses our endeavors because our endeavors are to serve him. God does not bless the endeavors of Satanists and secular people who are trying to accumulate wealth, status, and influence for themselves. So when we go in prayer as individuals or in groups, you remember that Jesus teaches us that whenever more than one of us are come together in prayer, then his presence is there. He teaches us that prayer is a unique benefit. It's a strategic advantage, a competitive advantage that only Christians have. And it's more powerful than any man-made weapon. It's more powerful than any government. It's more powerful than any propaganda campaign. We have prayer. And so if you're a Christian and you're not using prayer to fix these problems, then I need you to start. Please. I understand that you've probably seen prayer so far as, hey, God, I'm having a hard time in my life dealing with XYZ. I'm sick. My family is sick. My career's not going well. I'm heartbroken over this and that. I need you to provide reassurance that everything's going to be okay. And I'm not saying those prayers don't need to be made. You should, obviously. Please don't misinterpret this as me saying that those prayers aren't equally as important. But have you actually been praying for America? Have you been praying for the people out there on the front lines like Thomas Massie, who are going out there and saying, there is a force that is in direct opposition to our Christian desires? That force has to be named, pointed at, and stopped. And the people who are trying to do that need protection. We don't know whether or not they killed his wife, but we do know his wife is suddenly dead. And we do know that his heart is going to be hurting for a long time. And we do know his children are going to be missing their mothers, confused over why this happened. And so you, as a Christian, have a role to play in this. You need to be praying to God for the protection and the providence of all of the people out there fighting this war, yourself included. That's one mode of communication that we as Christians have as a unique advantage that we must utilize. The other mode of communication that we have that the others do not is this. We have this. This tells us the story of human history. This tells us why nations rise and fall. This tells us how to properly live amongst each other. This tells us the difference between right and wrong. This tells us what our purpose for being here is and what the objective is and how to not get distracted by the intentional distractions of the people who want the war to go in one direction. They want you to be hyper-focused on presidential debates. They want you to be hyper-focused on class warfare, racial warfare, Marxism in all of its different forms, gender warfare. And it's not to say that we should just ignore all of those problems because they are all lies and we need to address the lies. We're called to do that too. But my point is that the Word of God, it's called the sword because it is the most valuable weapon in our fight. If you cannot say in honesty that you have spent time with the Word, this is a bi-directional communication. Remember, the first principle was prayer, where we go to God. The Word is God coming to us. The Word is the Word of God. And so when you sit here and you read it, and you read the study notes, and you listen to sermons, to better understand what the Word is supposed to be teaching us, that's utilizing an entirely separate but equally important mode of communication in this war. If you do not know the scriptures, if you don't know what the gospel is, what its intent was, what the purpose of Jesus' life was, what his teachings were, then you're going to be underarmed in this fight. You're not going to know how to defend Christian marriage, Christian gender roles, the Christian purpose for life. You're not going to be able to recognize the mark of the beast. You're not going to be able to recognize the source of evil. If you're not in the Word and you don't know Revelations 2:9 and Revelations 3:9, then you're going to hear we have to bless Israel because they're God's chosen people. And if you haven't read the Bible and you didn't know that Jesus himself called the Jews the synagogue of Satan and the children of the devil, and he said that they're not even Jews, then as I said, you're showing up for the fight in the war unprepared. You don't even know how to have the discussions. You don't even know what's right or wrong. And so if you're not praying, then you're not taking our needs to God. And you're not receiving God's transmission to us by sitting here and spending time with the Word, going to church, engaging in fellowship, then the two most important aspects of communication that we have to even have a chance at winning this war or surviving, then that's on you. That's not God turning his back on you. If you're not praying and you're not receiving his word, and you're looking around wondering why everything is getting worse around us, it's not because God turned his back on you, it's because you turned your back on God. And I'm not saying necessarily you as an individual, I'm talking about our entire communities and our entire nation. But I might be talking to you as an individual. If you're feeling, what is that word? Oh, there's an exact word for this. Compelled, not compelled. There's a word. Jeremy and I talked about it last night, where like you see a meme and it really resonates because you know it's calling you out. You know what I'm talking about. You know how often you're praying and you know what you're praying about. Is it all selfish needs? God, help me with this, help me with that. Oh. And you know how much time you're spending with the Word. And so that's a second principle of war. First, we talked about, security. And then second, we talked about communication. This is the Christian perspective of the principles of war. We take inventory of our security by understanding who the enemy is and how he operates. We take inventory of our communications by understanding that prayer is how we communicate with God, take things to God, and that understanding his word is how we receive communications from God. And so it's all biblical. Every single bit of this. We have the teachings, but we got to get back to them. So that was pretty good. That was a preview. That was 20% of this book right here. So I'm looking forward to going over some of the other principles of war with you guys in future videos. Having a clear objective, concentration, mobility, the aspect of surprise. Critical. Cooperation. Hey, guess what? How many Christian denominations are there? How much time do we spend throwing food at each other, talking about your denomination versus my denomination? Meanwhile, the Jews capture our entire country and they start sacrificing our children, and we're unable to even cooperate with each other. The economy of force, pursuit, and obedience. Those are the other principles of war that we'll get into in future episodes. So, great stream this morning, you guys. I really appreciate you spending some time with me, and I hope that you guys felt compelled to pick up your Bibles, sit quietly in prayer, engage in fellowship, reach out to your fellow Christians. I called my friend last night and we talked for an hour. I got the news about Thomas Massie's wife and I was black-pilled. I sent it to him and he was black-pilled, and I was like, you know what? We need to talk, because this much negativity and darkness, even as devout Christians who have put our entire lives on the line. Jeremy runs a platform with 75,000 followers. Mine here is, 22,000 followers. Our faces are on this. Our names are on this. We put our life savings and our reputation on the line. And I say all these things to demonstrate just how much we care about these issues. And even we still, in the face of the tactics of the devil, killing people's wives, for a brief moment, we can feel overwhelmed with despair. But when I went and reached out to my fellow Christian last night and we talked for an hour about this, and we remembered how far back this problem goes, how many eras of human history where we had to watch an empire rise and then fall as they fell away from God. We talked about the root diagnosis, the causes, and then also the identifiable solutions, the prescriptions, some of these principles of war. That's how you refill your heart. That's how you refill the desire to stay on the mission field. It is very tempting to say, so what you're telling me is we have basically 0% of a chance to fix the government. We have no chance to fix the education. We're not going to fix the media. These people have beyond trillions of dollars of influence when it comes to owning the actual currency of our nation. When we looked at the odds being stacked against us from that lens, it really does make you want to just bury your head in the sand and say, you know what? I'm going to spend my later years, how many ever years I have left before the Mossad kills me or whatever else, I'm just going to try to spend them on being happy. I'm going to go and evangelize and hope for the best, but kind of giving up because it feels futile. We cannot slip into that. The Great Commission has not ended because things are really bad. The Great Commission is ongoing until Jesus returns. We do not get to opt out of the Great Commission, ever. Not until the day you die. You don't work 60 years, get a bunch of money, and then retire and say, I don't want to touch politics anymore. It's just too stressful. We don't have a choice. We do not have a choice, guys. So I think that's going to wrap it up. Where are we? We're at close to the 2-hour mark. That's actually longer than I planned on going today. I only planned on a first hour. But as we got into the subjects about the principles of war, I wanted to give you guys a preview of some of the exact methods we can use to improve the situation. We're not going to turn this into a devout world. That's accepted. We understand that. But our objective, as I said in the first hour, is not to fix the world. Our objective is to save souls. Not through our own capabilities, but by bringing people to the only one capable of saving souls, who we know is obviously Jesus Christ. And the methods that we use to do that are by preaching the gospel, getting people into churches, calling up our fellow Christians and saying, how are you doing? That's what we got to do. So I hope you guys take all of this seriously. I do. It's what I've devoted my life to, and what I will happily give my life to if I had to come to that. I obviously don't want that, but when we look around at the seriousness of the situation, we don't see a lot of representation of people like this who feel this way in any of our institutions. And so we can't trust the institutions to get us out of this. All we can trust is the Holy Bible. So, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. I hope you enjoyed the stream. I will probably be chilling the rest of the weekend. I don't know if I'll do another stream. We'll see. I'm interested to know if any more news comes out from Thomas. I doubt he's going to go and tell us the cause of death this weekend. I'm honestly not sure that we'll ever be told the cause of death. And frankly, even if we were, you guys have to understand one last thing about this. Let's just say Thomas Massie comes out and says, hey, I've been hearing a lot of rumors, people talking about, oh, this must be because you went on Tucker and talked about AIPAC and you wanted to end the Fed. It's not that at all, guys. She had a brain tumor. She died of natural causes. She's in heaven now. Maybe Thomas comes out and says that. The fact of the matter is, we'll never be able to know if that's true. And frankly, it would be difficult to hold it against him if it weren't true, but he were forced to say that in order to protect his family. When you understand how the mafia works, the mafia are not people who believe that lying is a sin. They're not people who believe that killing is a sin. Don't think for 1 second that if this was murder, if Thomas Massie comes out and says, guys, it was not murder, it was natural causes, she was sick, whatever, there is an equal likelihood that they have already told him, sure would be sad if something happened to one of your kids next. Wouldn't that be tragic? And that's all you have to say. And what are you supposed to do at that point? Are you supposed to keep pushing it? Are you supposed to try to line up another interview to reveal the Israel influence and the Jewish influence? Are you supposed to start sacrificing your kids for this? Hey, maybe you'll go into the witness protection program. Oh, wait, who runs the witness protection program? Yeah, the federal government. So there is literally no escaping this evil other than putting your faith in Jesus Christ. And even then, what happened to the disciples? They did not escape worldly evil. 11 out of 12 of them were brutally murdered for their faith, beheaded, cut in half, thrown off of cliffs, crucified upside down, their skin torn off of their body. And so don't go fooling yourself into thinking that I'm going to have safe passage through this world so long as I put my faith in Jesus Christ. What you have secured for yourself in doing so is a fulfilling life here on earth and eternal life forever thereafter. And so you got to pray. You got to pray for Thomas Massie and his family because we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. We don't know if they've already told him, if you keep pushing this, your kids are next. We just don't know. And it's not just Thomas Massie. That's everybody in the federal government. That's every person who has significant influence in our society. Do you remember what happened to Kanye West? Where his Jewish personal trainer, who was actually just his handler, told him that he would be sent to a mental institution if he continued to talk about the Jews. He would be locked up in a psychiatric ward and would never see his children again if he kept going about the Jews. And so prayer is all we got to address issues like that. We don't have helicopters. We don't have our own witness protection program that says, hey, Thomas Massie, bring your kids, come live with me. We'll escape the federal government. Hey, do you know what happened to Randy and Sarah Weaver? I happen to have their book right here. The Federal Siege at Ruby Ridge. Average American family accurately diagnoses that Zionists are running the government, dragging Americans into war, killing hundreds of thousands of our sons and daughters, racking up trillions of dollars of debt, destroying our economy for Jews. They accurately diagnose all this and they say, I want no part of this. I want to extricate myself from normie world and I want to go live in the middle of the woods, self-sufficient, a lot like Thomas Massie. What happens to them? The federal government just follows them into the forest and starts killing their family members. I said it in the post last night. I'll read it. And then I promise this will be the last thing of the day. Because if you're not on board, if you don't know the risks of being on board, then I'm going to lay them out for you very, very clearly here. I posted what happened to Thomas and I said, this is the biggest story of the year. We are dealing with true evil. The truth I have accepted is that some of us are not going to make it out of this alive. In this case, the classic mafia tactic of murdering family members might be even more effective. They can't kill him. That would be too obvious. But it sure would be a tragedy if something happened to his wife. And if he keeps pushing it, his children. I'm just saying. A well-liked congressman with a great reputation easily wins his state election against an AIPAC-backed candidate and proceeds to drop all of the receipts on AIPAC during his Tucker Carlson interview 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks later, his wife, who appeared perfectly healthy just days ago, dies suddenly and no cause of death is provided. This is meant to scare us all. The chilling effect of going public about the Jews and coincidentally having your family members suddenly up and die should be observed as a reminder that we are in a literal war with a body count. They killed JFK over this exact conflict and his brother. What happened to Ted Pike's wife, Alyn? If you aren't genuinely willing to die to stand up to Jewish influence, then don't touch the subject. I beg all of my fellow Christians, now is the time for prayer. We all must be praying for the protection of Christ's soldiers taking on the Synagogue of Satan. We can't do this with only human protections. We need divine protection over each and every truth teller, trying to shed light on the oldest evil in existence, Satan and his children. And that's the truth. If you're not willing to die, don't touch the subject. Because they've shown us that's what they are willing to do to those who do touch the subject. So, what a bright way to end the show, right? Hey, let's all just be willing to die for this. But this is where we're at. There is no political solution. And by the way, I have to say, otherwise they're going to throw me in jail. I'm not implying that we take up arms and physically hurt anybody. But what I am saying is that being bold in the truth and going out and evangelizing and identifying the enemy who is the synagogue of Satan, who are people that call themselves Jews but have nothing to do with the ancient religions in the Old Testament, those Jews, if you're not willing to risk it all for that, then we're not going to make headway. And this is why we have arrived in the situation that we're in. Because people have not been willing to go out on a limb. Not enough people. I mentioned a handful in history and a handful presently, but we don't need a handful. We need thousands. We need tens of thousands. We don't necessarily need millions, but we do need tens of thousands to 100,000 people who are willing to put everything they have on the line for this. And it's scary, trust me, I know, but what else are you willing to die for? Like, what else is there? I really don't get it. I understand you want to protect your family, and I understand you've worked hard to establish the life that you have now, but we're talking about God's kingdom here on earth. We're talking about the Great Commission. Wow, what a day. What a day. Okay, guys, I should probably wrap it up. 10 a.m. I got a gym session to attend to. I don't even know what else is on my agenda today. I'm probably going to go to the thrift store, try to take my mind off of some of this evil, and then we'll recuperate and maybe do another live stream tomorrow. I appreciate everybody that joined on Instagram, everybody that joined on Rumble. Saw some pretty good viewership over on Rumble. We're hovering around 30 people over there. Like to see it. Subscribe here on Instagram. They have shadow banned this account, so I can't even really get new followers through the algorithm. They literally don't share my posts to new followers. They have removed me from the algorithm. And then whenever somebody tries to follow me, they get a pop-up saying, "Are you sure you want to follow this account who has shared misinformation?" And then they are removing my followers. Yeah, I've gone over this on previous streams. They're trying to destroy my platform. So I need every subscription that I can get, and I need you to subscribe to the backup account on Instagram, which is at Beholden the Truth Official, and the Rumble account, which is just / Beholden the Truth. You can find me on Telegram as well. That's like the hidden VIP fallout shelter in case everything collapses. I'm on Telegram, t.me / Beholden the Truth Official. And I think that's it. Those are the main three: Rumble, Telegram, Instagram. I'm on YouTube as well. If you want to go check out that content, my full length documentaries are there, including America and Israel, Jesus and Judas. It is a great documentary. I put that documentary out 2 weeks after October 7th happened and predicted every single thing that has happened so far. I called it out as a false flag that the Israel government knew was going to happen and allowed to happen and probably had a role in helping happen. Talked about the greater Israel agenda, talked about the long history of sabotages and backstabbing that Israel has done to America, USS Liberty, the stolen nuclear secrets, killing JFK, the spy rings, Epstein ring, on and on and on. It's a good documentary. You should watch it. It's on YouTube. It's also on Rumble. All right, guys, let's get out of here. Enjoy your weekend. Please, please pray. Pray for the protection and the providence of all of the modern saints and prophets of our time, all of the soldiers of Christ who are out there fighting this battle. I want you to become one of them once you're ready. Get familiar with the word, get comfortable with your daily prayers, and then go help us out in any way that you can. All right, guys, take care.